Hello and welcome. In this podcast, I want to provide some of the evidence, mostly from mainstream historical sources, that proves we, the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people, and the biblical Israelites are one and the same. That the origins of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people can be traced all the way back to the exact same region the Israelites had earlier been resettled following their Assyrian captivity in the 7th century BC, and then burst into history coming from the same area, just as the Israelites themselves disappeared from it and history. Now, either this is all a complete coincidence and the biblical Israelites simply disappeared into thin air, never to be heard of or seen again, or after having migrated out of northern Assyria into Europe, they became known by other names. Since both the Anglo-Saxon Celtic peoples and Israelites also share the same physical white and reddish appearance, the same characteristics, traits, customs, and traditions, and fulfill the exact same identity marks Yahweh God said they would be identified by in the future, then it becomes quite clear that they are one and the same. So let's start with Peter B Ellis and a book he wrote in 1990 entitled The Celtic Empire, with a quote from page 9. The Celts were the first European people north of the Alps to emerge into recorded history, but the first references to them appear in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, when they began to encounter the peoples of the Mediterranean cultures, end quote. The well-respected English historian Sharon Turner, who lived in the 17 and 1800s, who wrote the monumental work History of the Anglo-Saxons and identified their origins south of the Caucasus Mountains, wrote, quote, "The migrating Scythians crossed the Araxes, passed out of Asia, and suddenly appeared in Europe in the 6th century BC. The names Saxon, Scythian, and Goth are used interchangeably," end quote. So this sets their place and time of origin. The Celts, Scythians, Goths, and Saxons, all being one and the same, appeared in Europe for the first time around the 6th century BC, having migrated from the south of the Caucasus Mountains. In fact, many historians record the arrival of millions of dispersed people who flooded into Eastern Europe from Asia Minor starting from the 6th century BC. They poured in through the Caucasus Mountain region and is the reason we are still called Caucasians to this day. What is truly fascinating is that as the House of Israel passed from history, having been taken captive by the Assyrians in the 7th century BC and resettled in northern Persia south of the Caucasus Mountains, the Celts and Scythians, Saxons, suddenly burst into recorded history, coming from the same direction the Israelites had been settled. Remember, the nation of Israel had split into two separate nations, Israel and Judah, after King Solomon's death, as recorded in 1 Kings 12. In the case of the House of Israel, the biblical and historical records tell us that after they were defeated by the Assyrians in 721 BC, they were all transported and resettled in northern Persia, with no one returning to Palestine except one priest, as recorded in 2 Kings 17, verses 18, 23 to 28. They are then said to have migrated north through the Caucasus Mountains and then west through Europe to the land they would be replanted in fulfillment of the words Samuel had prophesied to King David, as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 10 and 11. This is further confirmed in 2 Esdras chapter 13 verses 40 to 45, stating, after the house of Israel was defeated and resettled by the Assyrians, they took, quote, counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, for through that country there was a great way to go, namely of 1.5 years, and the same region is called Ar-Serith. Ar is the Chaldean word for river. The biblical archaeologist Dr. E. Raymond Captain believed this may refer to Eastern Europe, in the region of modern Romania, where a river Serif still exists to this day. In 1723, the French church scholar and Huguenot refugee Dr. Jacques Badi wrote a book entitled The Triumph of Providence, in which he stated, quote, unless the 10 tribes of Israel are flown into the air or sunk into the earth, they must be those 10 Gothic tribes that entered Europe in the 5th century BC. Josephus, the renowned ancient historian who lived in the 1st century AD, wrote in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 5, verse 2, that out of all the, quote, entire body of Israel, in quote, 12 tribes, only 2 tribes remained in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, since the, quote, 10 tribes were beyond Euphrates till now, end quote, and were an, quote, immense multitude and could not be estimated by numbers, end quote. This migration has also been confirmed by many other leading historians, archaeological findings, and historical records, which is all in fulfillment of the promises and prophecies concerning Israel. James confirms this, writing, quote, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, end quote, which is James chapter 1, verse 1. This was in fulfillment of the words previously spoken through the prophets that Christ himself would search for his sheep, and after finding them, bring them out of the nations and look after them in their own land. This is why he commanded his disciples to, quote, go not off into the way of the nations, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which is from Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 to 7. So while the name Israel may have mostly disappeared from the historical records after their captivity, it certainly does not mean the people themselves vanished from off the face of the earth. They had rather become lost among the other nations as they migrated to a new land northwest of Palestine, just as promised in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 10 and 11. Yahushua also said, quote, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel, end quote, from Matthew chapter 15, verse 24. And he surely knew where his lost sheep or lost Israelites were to be found, since there is nothing hidden from him. Obviously, they weren't to be found in Palestine, otherwise they wouldn't be lost. So what had happened? Well, as they migrated across Europe, they became, quote, scattered abroad, end quote, lost and hidden among the nations, becoming known over time by new names including the Krumri, the Saki, the Cimmerians, the Scythians, the Goths, Picts, Scots, Vikings, Angles, Jutes, Celts, Saxons, Franks, and Normans, all different names for the Israelites linked together by the black obelisks of Shanamazia in Babylon, the Bahanstan rock in Persia, and other monuments, all confirmed by many historians, including Herodotus, Pliny, Ptolemy, Josephus, and Turner. An example of this link can be found on the Bahanstan rock in Persia, which lists the three different ancient languages: Old Persian, Elamonite, and Babylonian. The nations and peoples Darius the Great, who lived in the 500 and 400 BC, conquered and ruled over the king of the Medo-Persia Empire. In the Persian and the Amite versions, one of these provinces is called Scythia or Saki. In the Babylonian text, this province is called the Krumeri, translated, quote, land of the Sumerians, end quote. The Bahanstan rock inscription therefore establishes that the Saki lived in the land of the Sumerians, and that they formed part of the people known to the ancients as Scythians. Ancient Greek historian Herodotus also records, quote, the Persians call all Scythians Saki, end quote, which is in the Polymnia, book 7. This is of great significance because the Assyrians referred to the northern kingdom of Israel in their records, including the black obelisk of Sharon, which is now in the British Museum, as the Beth Kumeri. Since Kumeri and Kumeri are phonetically the same in Babylonian, the KH was pronounced as a G, these two names must refer to the same people, the Israelites. British historian Sharon Turner writes that the, quote, Anglo-Saxons, Lowland Scots, Normans, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Dutch, Belgians, Lombards, and Franks have all sprung from that great fountain of the human race, which we have distinguished by the terms Scythian or Gothic, end quote. That the names, quote, Saxon, Scythian, and Goth are used interchangeably, end quote. And then goes on to mention that the ancient Celtic and Sumerian languages were the same, and also says the Celti or Celts, which were the same people as the Galati, which is, I'll just add there, which is whom Paul wrote, the Galatians, who are also identified as Celts, that they in turn were the same as the Galli or the Gauls, and that the Celti were, quote, one of the branches of the Sumerian stock, end quote. This is from Sharon Turner book entitled History of the Anglo-Saxons, page 36. Now, Sir Henry Rawlinson, whose work was crucial to the disciplement of cuneiform script, wrote, after carefully studying the Bahanstan rock inscriptions, quote, the identification of the Persian Saki or Scythians with the people named by the Greeks, the Krumeri or Krumri, would seem highly probable, end quote, which is from the Proceedings of the Royal Asiatic Society, May 12, 1849, page 21. The English scholar and Oxford professor of ancient history, George Rawlinson, wrote, quote, we have reasonable grounds for regarding the Krumeri or Sumerians, who first appeared on the confines of Assyria and Media in the 7th century BC, and the Saki of the Behenstein Rock nearly 2 centuries later as identical with the Beth Kumari of Samaria, or the 10 tribes of the house of Israel, end quote, which is from the History of Herodotus, Book 7, page 378. Therefore, the link between the house of Israel, whom were also known as the Kumri or Kumarai, the Scythians and Sumerians, and the Anglo-Saxon Celts, is established beyond doubt. They were all one and the same people, known by different names. It is interesting to note that another British historian wrote, quote, "The word Celti or Celts, meaning hidden, the word which gives us the Irish form of Celt, meaning concealment or secret. Thus, some believe that Celti meant the hidden or secret people," end quote, which is another quote from Peter B Ellis' book, The Celtic Empire, page 9. Coincidence, or the perfect name by which lost or secret or hidden Israel was to become known as just as prophesied? Remember, the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people are said to have burst into history at the very same time and place that Israel disappeared. Coincidence? I think not. Sharon Turner continues, quote, "The Saxons were a Scythian tribe, and of the various Scythian nations which have been recorded, the Saki or Saki are the people from whom the descent of the Saxons may be inferred with the least violation of probability. Saki Suna, or the sons of Saki, abbreviated into Saxon, which is the same sound as Saxon, seems a reasonable etymology of the word Saxon. The Saki, who in Latin are called Saki, were an important branch of the Scythian nation. They were so celebrated that the Persians called all the Scythians by the name Saki, and Pliny, the elder Roman historian living between 23 and 79 AD, speaks of them as among the most distinguished people of Scythia, as recorded in Pliny Library 6c9, which is end quote, which is from the History of the Anglo-Saxons, page 87. It would appear the name Saxon, which we are also known as, not only bears witness of who we are, but is also a direct fulfillment of the promise Yahweh made to Abraham. And I quote from Genesis 21:12, "And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, for in Isaac should thy seed be called." This promise is confirmed in the New Testament, as recorded in Romans 9:7. "Neither because thy are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called." And then again in Hebrews 11 verse 18, "Of whom it is said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called." His people were to be called by the name of Isaac, and as Sharon Turner pointed out, the name Saxon comes from the name Saxi Suna, or the sons of Saki, which can be translated as sons of Isaac. This occurred after the house of Israel became known as the house of Isaac, as recorded in Amos 7:16. At the time of Israel's captivity, records of Britain, Wales, and Scotland all confirm they were Israelites. Sharon Turner found further proof that the Saxons originated from the same place the Israelites had been resettled in the 7th century BC, saying, quote, "The important fact of a part of Armenia having been named Saxon is mentioned by an ancient Roman historian, Strabo, in another place, and seems to give a geographical locality to our primeval ancestors and to account for the Persian words that occur in the Saxon language, as they must have come into Armenia from the northern regions of Persia," end quote, which is also from the History of the Anglo-Saxons, Volume 1, page 59. Remember, the house of Israel was transported to the, quote, "northern regions of Persia," end quote, south of the Caucasus Mountains, which is exactly where the kingdom of Armenia lay in ancient times, again, where the Saxons are said to have come from. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which was originally compiled by the order of King Alfred the Great in approximately 890 AD, confirms this in recording, quote, "The first inhabitants were the Britons, who came from Armenia, and first peopled Britain southward," end quote. It is no coincidence that the Welsh tradition also records that the Welsh people came to Britain in ancient times directly from the land of the Cimmerians. They even continue to call themselves the Cymri or Cymru to this day, which is phonetically the same as the Cymri, Cymri, or Cymri the Assyrians and Babylonians used for the Israelites. The Scots also declare in their most important national document, the Scottish Declaration of Independence, signed in Albrecht in 1320 AD by the nobles and barons of Scotland, including Robert de Bruce, that they were also descendants of the house of Israel, who, quote, "journeyed from Greater Scythia," end quote, to their home in the British Isles. It declares, quote, "Holy Most Father and Lord, we know from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage tribes, but nowhere could they be subdued by any race, however barbarian. Hence they came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to their home in the west, where they still live today," end quote. So we can briefly summarize the evidence as follows. The descendants of Jacob became known as Israel. The Assyrian name for Israel on Saramanzia's black obelisk was Cymri. The Babylonian name for Israel, pronounced the same as the Assyrian Cymri, was Kimri. The Behistine rock inscription identified the people called the Cymri as the Sac or Saki. The Bible calls Israel the house of Isaac, as in Amos 7:16, which is phonetically the same as Sac or Saki. The historians identify the Sac or Saki who migrated into Europe as the Scythians. The historians identify the Cymri who also migrated into Europe as the Cimmerians. The historians state the Scythians and the Cimmerians became known as the Anglo-Saxon Celts. You may be wondering how the Israelites came to be known as the Beth Crumeri or the Crumeri? The answer is simple. The Assyrians and Babylonians started to call the house of Israel the house of Omri in honor of Israel's king Omri, who ruled during the 8th century BC. Omri was one of Israel's most notorious kings, as recorded in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 16 to 30, who, quote, did worse than all that were before him, end quote, and was the father of King Ahab, who is recorded as doing even more evil. King Omri had such a lasting impact on Israel that the prophet Micah records 150 years later, at the time of the Assyrian invasion, that the Israelites still, quote, observed the statutes of Omri and all the practices of Ahab's house. You have followed their traditions, end quote, which is Micah chapter 6, verse 16. Interestingly, King Zimri was on the throne before King Omri. I think the connection and origin is pretty clear. So, does any of this matter? Does it matter if we, the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people, really are the descendants of the biblical Israelites? Absolutely. Why? Because, quote, where there is no vision, the people perish, which is from Proverbs 29:18. Sadly, we have forgotten who we are and where we came from, and as a result have lost our way. We have become blinded to our true purpose and destiny as his people. Unless we sober up soon and remember, we will perish. Why? Because we will never cherish or protect those things we do not value. Instead, we continue to take all that we are and have for granted, forgetting that none of these things came by chance or without sacrifice. Yahweh called us to be his people and to carry out his plans and purpose on the earth. He fulfilled in us the wonderful provisions and promises of the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, making us a great and powerful influence in the world. We have been blessed more than any other people or nation, that we might fulfill the purpose for which he called us. Yet we stand by, blinded to the enemy which surrounds us, plotting and robbing us of all that we once were and had. We have been fooled into believing that our origins, heritage, history, traditions, and customs do not matter, yet they are of the greatest value and importance. Why? Because these all display and prove that we are the descendants of the biblical Israelites, and proof in themselves that Yahweh has kept every one of his promises to our forefathers and therefore can absolutely be trusted. It is time we remembered the God of our forefathers so that we might repent and believe him once again. Only then will we fulfill our true purpose and destiny as his servant people and truly be a blessing to all the nations of the world. We, the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people, not only appeared in history at the same time and place the Israelites disappeared, but we also fulfill in our history every mark the prophets of the Bible wrote Israel would be identified by in the future. We settled in the Isles of the Sea, northwest of Palestine, as promised in Isaiah chapter 24, verses 14 and 15, and in chapter 49, verses 1 and 12, and chapter 59, verse 19, and in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 3, verses 12 to 18, and chapter 23, verse 8, and chapter 31, verses 7 to 8, and verses 10. We became a nation and a community or commonwealth of nations as recorded in Genesis chapter 35, verses 10 to 15, and chapter 48, verse 19. We inherited and colonialised the desolate places, islands afar off, coastlands and ends of the earth, as promised in Isaiah 49 verse 8, 54 verse 3, and Jeremiah chapter 31 verses 8 and 10. We grew to become the fifth and largest ever empire reaching around the globe, as promised in Daniel chapter 2:44 and Romans 11:25. We became a multitude of people as countless as the stars, as promised in Genesis chapter 15 verse 5. We retained our monarchy as promised in Jeremiah chapter 33 verses 17 to 26 and 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 12 to 16. We became the chief of nations as stated in Deuteronomy chapter 26 verse 19 and Amos 6 verse 1. We came to control the world's sea gates as promised in Genesis chapter 22 verse 17 and chapter 24 verse 60, and are blessed with great wealth as promised in Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 18 and chapter 33 verses 13 to 17, are renowned worldwide for our crops, land and beef as promised in Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 3 to 14, have been a blessing to mankind, showing the fruits of righteousness as promised in Matthew 21:43 and Genesis 18 verse 18, and have been a great missionary people taking Christianity around the globe as promised in Isaiah 27 verse 6, 43 verse 21, chapter 44 verses 3 to 5, Mark chapter 16 verse 15 and Matthew chapter 7 verse 20, to name only a few examples. You see, we display in ourselves and our history our own proof that we really are the descendants of the biblical Israelites, which is further proven by our many shared customs, laws, traditions, emblems, symbols, and ceremonies, and with that proof, responsibility to serve Him. Thank you.